Hello and welcome to Sport News.
Hello and welcome to Daily Politics, reaching you from TrustTV here in Abuja. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. My name is Suleiman. Today we are looking at the Buhari economy in the last full year before he leaves office. It is also the last year of a full substantive budget for his government. And yet, it is also a year of politics. Many members of the cabinet will resign at some point to pursue other political interests. But we also see the president making dashing moves like the appointment of Dayo Salami as National Economic Advisor 7 years after. As one of the cardinal areas of the president's campaign in 2015, some experts are saying the president left it too late to make such an appointment. With inflation rate at double-digit, rising unemployment, high consumer price index, and an uncertain security situation in the country, ordinary Nigerians are feeling the crunch of a biting economy. And of course, there is the issue of high debt rate and skyrocketing exchange rate. Also, there is the looming fuel price increase when subsidy removal takes full effect later in the year. Well, it is not all gloom and doom. The government has invested in rail and road projects which it says can help jumpstart the economy even after they are no longer in office. It also claims big wins in agriculture and social interventions. And yet, Nigerians are wondering, what does this mean to them? Because in the streets, people still continue to complain about all kinds of economic hardships, especially rising food prices. In fact, some Nigerians have a word for describing the economy under Buhari government. They call it Buhariya. So today we're asking, is it too late in the day to turn things around? How much more can the government do? And what are the government's economic legacies, if any? Joining me on the program today is Professor Muhammad Muttaka of the Department of Economics, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Also with me is Malang Ahmad Musa Hussaini, who is an economist, an essayist, and a policy analyst. Welcome to Daily Politics, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Thank you. But as usual, we'll just take a break for a minute. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Daily Politics, and we're going straight into the discussions now about the Buhari economy. It's time to begin review of the president's, 7 years in government. So, Prof, naturally, I start with you as yes. Professor of economics, and the government had this idea that it was going to tackle security or insecurity in the country, tackle corruption, and then the economy. There is a sense in which all three are actually economic policies, because without security, you cannot talk about economic activity of any kind. And corruption definitely is an economic problem as well, just as it is a political one. So in this period so far, what can you say the government has got right? Let's begin with that.
Yeah, actually, fundamentally, economic system is always full of turbulence.
Okay.
It is on that basis that economic policies are enacted to address any turbulence that unforeseen or seen or perceived to happen. So in that situations, we can say it's a normal economic turbulence.
Okay.
But do the policies address the turbulence?
Okay.
The answer may be a mixed one. In some extent, yes, they have achieved certain things. In certain extent, is below average. But generally speaking, economy is something that you can say that for a society like ours, or any economic system, if there is economic development or economic progress, it must be seen, it must be touched, it can also be seen.
People can feel it.
Yeah, feel and everything that needs to be done. And there are two ways to look at it. One, you can say it's okay, we'll look at the indices. And when we look at the indices, we said, yes, the indices are doing well, and therefore we can say the economy is doing fine. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is to go beyond the indices.
Okay.
Despite the indices said, yes, we are making progress, we come out of recessions, the growth rate is this, and this. Do people feel the same way? So that's how you do to evaluate economic activities or economic governance, as it were.
Thank you. So, Mali Ahmed, the difference, the gap between the indices, they say that the inflation rate has come down, that growth rate has been increasing since June last year, and many other positive indices like that. What are the gaps between these numbers and the actual living conditions of Nigerians, ordinary Nigerians especially, at home and in the streets?
All right, thank you. I think for the past 2 decades, Nigeria has been experiencing what many economists actually call jobless growth.
Okay.
So even during the Obasanjo administration, right to up till this very administration, you've seen, in fact, the first decade of the early 2000s, 2010, with like stable, rapid growth in the economy, but it does not translate into jobs creation and job opportunities for the people. And right now we're also having looking at growth and other positive indices in terms of how they impact on the general population. And if you want to do that, you have to disaggregate those indices. If we say the GDP is growing, say 4% in the third quarter of 2021, then you have to look at what are the specific, you have to disaggregate it and see what are the specific drivers of that growth. Is it a rebound in oil prices? Is it some other kind of arrangements? And how, if these are the case, then you can see that definitely that growth does not, and it's not going to translate into improvement in the living conditions of the people, except if government judiciously apply or utilize those resources, in terms of policies and programs that directly impact on the general population. And I think that's where we're having the problem. There's a strong disconnect between government spending and what are the actual needs of the people at the grassroots level.
Okay.
So usually you go to places and you see there are a lot of wastage of resources and a lot of extravagance that you see in terms of government spending on what I can call white elephant projects, because at the end of the day you can see communities
white elephant projects like what?
Yeah, so maybe if you can look at them in terms of, number one, there's a lot of we have an over bloated actually recurrent spending.
Okay.
You see if you look at the national budget, you can see a significant portion of it actually goes into servicing government. So the government is large, it's huge, it's over bloated. It's, you know, and if you look at how many people are in this government, how many people are actually working for the federal government and all its agencies, and that's exactly what's happening also in the states at the states level. So on that part, when I say about White Elephant project, if you go to some state, you can see there's a lot of race for building, you know, overhead bridges and stuff like that. When rural communities don't have access to drinking water, when you have schools that are not properly equipped, when you have, you know, people suffering from deprivation, displacement, other security challenges, most especially now that you have, you know, the rising insecurity in the Northwest. So all these are key issues, core priorities, you know, of the local people that government needs to focus on instead of, you know, spending on, you know, some kind of, you know, cosmetics projects that I said
Thank
earlier.
you. So, Prof, when you have the disconnect that he is describing between growth and joblessness, or jobless, what normally happens? What are the why would an economy have growth on paper but joblessness in real life?
Yeah. Actually, it comes as a result of you are not taking ownership of your policies.
Okay.
It's directed from somewhere. Somewhere, World Bank, IMF will say, no, look at it now from the context of exchange rate. That is over 30 years now. World Bank and IMF are saying our currency is overvalued. For 30 years, we have been devaluating these currencies.
And it's still overvalued.
But it's still over. If you check the Article 4, the last Article 4, the visitation, there are 4 key issues there. They said devalue, then remove subsidy. If at all there is subsidy, remove subsidy. Then the next thing is that this recurrent expenditure is overbloated. But sometimes when you go to the literature of economics, there is no capital project without recurrent expenditure attached to it. So as you increase your capital expenditure, it means recurrent expenditure will also increase.
Interesting.
So sometimes you look at it when people start talking. Are they talking about economics or are they talking about something else? Because it's not the recurrent expenditure that is a problem, but the way it's used.
Okay.
Yes, because there is a distinction between cost of governance and recurrent expenditure. Because cost of governance is what entails the paraphernalia of governor office, people in office use to service themselves rather than the service of the society. You find out, for instance, when they talk about the police are deficient, you find out that majority, it is only in Nigeria that you take a well-trained police to guard a laborer in the road construction site. Half of these police, you find they were well-trained. What they are doing now is contrary to what they are training. Just guide
Whereas, for example, the construction company can hire its own security, private security people to create jobs, for example. Yes.
But they are not doing that. They will go and take the minimum police that you have and put them on the road, just guarding the laborers working in a construction site. So these are misnomers that need to be addressed. You see politicians that taking about 20 police alone, him and his families, and the entire his constituency.
So does that increase the cost of governance or recurrent expenditure?
It increases the cost of governance, not recurrent expenditure. Because when you look at it, how much salaries they paid. Because if you check in West Africa, I think we are the third least paid civil servants, if you take civil servant for it. If you take the cost of living now compare with the minimum wage.
So the problem is actually not the recurrent. This is very interesting, isn't it?
It's not.
And people, generally, when people talk about recurrent expenditure, they lump the two together with the understanding that it is the recurrent expenditure. But salaries in Nigeria are generally poor.
They were trained to do that. They were trained to do that. They were trained to do that, to say, yes, recurrence is. That's why they introduce so many systems in which is more corrupt than what they met before. If you take the IPPIS, the Auditor General just came out with his report and showed the kind of worms that in that system.
Mali Ahmed, these are exactly the kinds of reforms that the Buhari administration promised in 2015. To what extent can we say have they tried or done something?
Yeah, I think in terms of economic reforms, I think the evidence is clear for everyone to see. I think the government hasn't done that better actually in that aspect, because for me, if you look at two aspects of the economy, so if you look at the fiscal aspect and the monetary aspect, take CBN for example. CBN has been the primary role is actually to monetary policy stability, to stabilize the naira. And the naira has been staggering and getting worse. And then after that, look at the mess that happens with the BDCs. You had the BDCs were suspended around in 2015.
You mean Buhari changes?
Yeah, the Buhari change. Yeah. In 2015, in 2016, when this government came into power, there were around 2,700 BDCs. As of the time BDCs were banned in last year, they were around 5,600. They more than doubled their numbers. And what was it doing actually? They weren't involved in any real trading. It was just currency around tripping. Everyone knows that. And then the government didn't, have the political will at the time, to clamp down on this and say, okay, this is unacceptable. We have to stop this. So it was something that was actually, feeding into the economy, like at the expense of, the bigger economy. And you have other things that CBN abandoning its core mandate to go about, spending money here and there, throwing money to farmers, doing that. You have government agencies that are required to do that. If CBN wants to actually really invest in agriculture, they should recapitalize Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture. You even have others duplications like.
But the government will say that they have done exactly the same things, that they have had many different policies to, particularly in the area of agriculture, and not just agriculture, but the entire value chain within that area, the NISAL and all that. What's happening? Is it that these policies are not working, or they are like the figures also on paper?
Let me be very sincere. I'm not a politician, so I can talk freely.
This is a program for free talking.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is that if you are going into agriculture, what you provide is maybe to clear land. For instance, I can tell you there are some large dams that were built in the 80s, and not up to 10 hectares was used in those dams. I can cite Zobe Dam around Sokoto Rima side.
Okay.
There is one around Jibia side. There is one in Goronyo. All the land that is supposed to be cleared and provide that land for people to cultivate wasn't there. And unfortunate, then the crisis of the security came in.
So making it
worse. Because, so when you said it's okay, there is a pyramid of rice in Kebbi and what? Is it really the pyramid of rice? Or people just do what they call media tricks? They will tell you this is happening.
Social media pyramids.
Certainly. So the assessment of the policy is neither here nor there. Because if you said you are self-sufficient, at what cost? Self-sufficient is to be able to afford, and whenever you need it, you get it. The bag of rice, the price jacked up more than what you have in 2015.
Yes.
So if you compare with the income of individuals, because the income of individuals determine their purchasing power.
Yes.
Is their income improved? Their income has not improved. So they cannot purchase what is produced. That's why some of the companies have to close down, because they can produce without anybody buying it. So the main essence to evaluate any policy is to say, this is what I have done. These are the output I'm expecting. Then somebody should evaluate those output. If you said, it's okay, I'm going to invest in agriculture, I'm going to invest 1 billion naira, the output to get a self-sufficiency in rice, is it at the end of that season? Or 2 seasons as well? Because Nigerians are very, very active people. They need only a conducive environment that they can work. Because when you see them, it shows on their face that they want and they are living.
So, but what about the budgets under this government? How have they been different from budgets in previous governments? Because it is a change government, the government that openly campaigned on the idea that we want to do things different from how they used to be done in the economy, in society, and in many other areas. Have there been difference in the way budgets have been planned, executed, or even evaluated in this government?
Well, I think the more you look at it, then the more you begin to realize that there's actually little changes. Yeah, maybe at the beginning, the president was a bit intentional in the sense.
You mean there have been plenty change, or?
No, not much changes.
Okay, not
at the
much.
Beginning, of course, maybe there was some kind of renewed energy on the part of the presidency to say, okay, we want to do this, there was a lot of buzzword about zero-based budgeting and all that. But at the end of the day, it didn't materialize. And for me, I think the APC as a ruling party failed to actually, sell its vision to the broader coalition that brought it into governance. Because you said, okay, you have a budget at the National Assembly, there were insertions, there was padding and all that. But I think legally or constitutionally speaking, you can say that the National Assembly is empowered to actually tamper with the budget. You see that in other democracies in the US and other places.
Absolutely.
So it is actually the job of the presidency or whatever, the national leadership to sell that vision to the National Assembly to say, okay, look, we're going to focus our spending on social areas, and then you have to align with it. Then you have, a common budget where both the National Assembly and the executive actually agree with. But we didn't see that. There was a lot of, politicking, a lot of, political settlements, different political stakeholders coming in with different expectations. And that's what you see. And at the end of the day, the budget ended up looking exactly like what we had in the past. So there wasn't...
Except that this time, the costs are higher.
Yeah, of course it's increasing because if you look at the naira is getting worse to the dollar, and yeah. So, but if you take today's budget now and look at it in today's dollar terms, it is actually not bigger than maybe what we had in say,
the previous one.
Or 2014.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it is the value of the naira that has fallen.
Absolutely.
That has made the budgets higher,
bigger and bigger.
but they are not bigger than previous. That's interesting. Prof, you seem to have a reaction.
Yes, on that budget issues,
yes.
It is very unfortunate.
Okay.
Because when he comes in the first budget speech, he said it's going to be zero-based budget. Okay. That means you focus on what you are going to do this year and finish. And to next year, you prioritize and move ahead. But even at then, people outside the economy, like the World Bank, why I had to mention them, because they determine what we should do at every stage.
Okay.
So they said, no, that doesn't go well with us. What you do is going back to the envelope-based budget. We just give, and that's contradictory.
Must Nigeria, as a sovereign nation,
yes,
must Nigeria follow what they say? Because
yes,
we're only one nation.
Because when you are not sure of yourself,
okay,
at the policy level, then you have to listen to everybody. But when you are sure, you know where you are going, you say no. Look, I have expert can tell me this, what I should do. Because when you look at all the reforms we are talking about, the TSA, it's a World Bank agenda. They said the essence of that TSA is to bring all the money inside one basket so that they will not allow you to release money to this sector. And very unfortunate to the government itself. They made promise in their own agenda, because if you look at the APC agenda, they said they will spend not less than 15% of the annual budget on education. But throughout the 7 years, it's less than 7%. And the 7%, 40% or 50% of it goes to unity schools.
Okay.
So you find out that all what you intend to do, because for any economy to develop, you have to have a very strong human capital. And once you don't invest in human capital, you'll not get it right. They spend only 7% on education, 2% on health, less than 3% on social services, and spend 38% on debt servicing.
Interesting. So what?
So you find out that there is a disconnect. The economy that you intend to revive, you are stabbing it with the source of development, with the source of structure that will deliver the reforms that you wanted to do.
Thank you. That's interesting, because debt servicing, 38% of the budget, goes into servicing, to the extent that some people are saying that this is up to almost 90% of the entire revenues. Yes. That the actual money that the country earns goes into debt servicing, and then the money for every other thing else is actually borrowed. So you are borrowing on top of what you had already borrowed and cannot pay. What's happening? And because people said that before this government in 2015, you had about 12 trillion. Yes. Now we are talking about over 30 trillion in debt, both domestic and local. What's happening with these borrowings?
Yeah, I think the borrowing level is quite unsustainable. Okay. And the thing is, if you look at it, we had both a debt problem and a revenue problem. Because you look at Nigeria, fine, they might say, okay, if you look at the debt to, say, maybe GDP ratio, it's not that high with us other countries. But forget about it. Look at the debt to actually revenue ratio. Okay. You're working, you have a salary, say 100,000 naira, and then every month, and you're indebted to the tune that every month you have to part with 19,000 naira out of your salary to repay that debt, living with only 10,000. Is that sustainable? It's not sustainable. So we should not be talking about, say, debt to GDP. Yeah, debt to GDP may paint a picture that's not that bad at all, but if you look at it, we have also a revenue problem, because if you look at our revenue, as the percentage of GDP is also very low. We're doing far lower than a lot of countries, across the world. So I think the issue is we have a debt that is a level that is unsustainable. We have a very low or inefficient, revenue capacity that is not, adequate at servicing that debt.
But the government actually claims that revenue has been growing, particularly in the last 1 year or so. For example, they said that the 2021 revenue that the government drew in has 38% higher than what they got in 2020. So the claim is that they are actually generating more revenue now than before. How true is that?
Then maybe you look at it in two factors. You look at it in naira terms, as I said earlier, maybe due to the depreciation in the naira. And also you look at it in terms of, the growth in oil prices. Okay. Because the bulk of our revenue, over 80% of our revenues actually comes from oil prices, and the more the oil, prices begin to appreciate in the international market, then the more the government is able to generate more revenue. But the fundamental thing is, you have to borrow according to your ability to pay, not just borrow because you're a big country or you have a huge GDP, but according to your ability, according to your earning, according to your revenue capacity, and that's what we're not doing. And if we continue at this level, now you have almost close to 90% of your revenue that goes into servicing debt. Then you can imagine what will happen in the next 4 or 5 years.
But how much was this before the government? How much was this the debt servicing? How much the ratio of the debt to revenue? How much was it before 2015? So that we can have an idea of whether things have gotten worse or better or stayed the same under the government, this government.
Yeah.
Please.
Yes, at that time, during Obasanjo, when they did this debt cancellations and negotiation, yes, it bring down the level of debt. And most of it at that time is the internal debt. Okay. Which still continued to grow up because...
Which was left.
Which was left. Okay. But the external debt is now lower than what is so the servicing of that debt at that time, because the domestic debt mostly are contractors, civil servants that they have earned something, pensions and the rest,
gratuities,
which you don't have to service debt, but you have to repay it, but they are not paying at that level. So the issue is two-way. It's not even the relationship of the ratios that is important here. The relationship to that ratios is important when your economy is at par with those countries you are comparing. But you are not at par with those countries. Even your GDP growth is questionable in the sense that what economic activities involves to grow the GDP? Because most of the companies are not producing.
Interesting. So I think on that note, we'll be going on break for a minute. When we return, we will continue with discussion on the Buhari economy 7 years after. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
January 15th every year, Nigeria observes the Armed Forces Remembrance Day in honor of soldiers who gave their lives for the unity of the nation. All across the country, wreaths are laid, speeches are made, government officials attend elaborate parades performed by soldiers and the Nigerian Legion. What is celebrated is the surrender of the secessionist Biafran forces to the Nigerian government on January 15, 1970. January 15th was also the day the first military coup took place in Nigeria. January 15th, 1966 and January 15th, 1970 all hold deep significance in the history of the country. Is this a mere coincidence? Join us on TrustTV as we bring you an exclusive broadcast of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day on January 15th, 2022.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Daily Politics on Trust TV. And today we're discussing the Buhari economy. A little over a year left in the life of the president's administration. You can also follow the discussion via our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So, Prof, as we were saying, one of the promises that the government made in 2015 especially was that it will work towards diversifying the economy. And one of the things Malia Ahmed said is that the revenue base of the government remains oil. And if oil is increasing, then revenue increases. Why have we still not been able to diversify the economy? 8 years, isn't that enough time?
No, the economy is diversified. When you look at the GDP numbers, it shows that the economy is diversified. It's just only in terms of revenue that oil become the main revenue source. But in terms of economy, there are sectors that by their indices,
they have improved.
They have improved, like ICT, agric, services. But even those numbers are questionable. Because when you said service has grew without the industry doing well, then what services are you talking about? But because ICT, you can say ICT because of Corona, then everybody go back to the online. So the hardware and software has to involve in the productions and assembly and what have you. But the main fact of the issue is that when you are talking about revenue, because the managers of the economies are really obsessed about revenue. They want to increase revenue. How do you increase revenue without increasing level of employment? Where there is no increase in production. How can you increase revenue? Because it is only when people get job, you tax them. Now that they have sent a finance bill, they are going to increase tax. They have increased tax last year and this year as well. The reason why you see the increase is minimal because it's the same people that you are taxing more.
So the tax base has not expanded.
Has not expanded because there is no new employment. The social investment scheme that they introduce is not taxable. When you give a stipend of 5,000, how can you tax 5,000? So unless you extend productions, one thing you can give it to them is that they made investment in infrastructure.
Okay.
They changed some roads. There are roads construction all over the place.
Thank you, Prof.
But the crisis in that, most of the companies that are doing these roads are not Nigerian companies.
So the value that they add to the economy.
The moment they add the value is just the peripheral.
Okay.
The chunk of the profit, they repatriate it to their own economy and therefore sucking you dry. So you will see there are so massive investment in infrastructure, but you don't feel it. You don't see it. People don't have real income.
These are political decisions rather than economic ones, because it is the government that would decide whether to hand a contract to company A or B or C. That's a purely political decision. So is it that the politics is not right, or the politics doesn't guide the economy well, or what's happening? How can you have, companies that don't add much economic value, engaging in your infrastructure projects that would otherwise have created thousands of employment and therefore increase the revenue base of the country? What's wrong?
There are two things involved. First, I think there is not any overarching strategy, surrounding all these things. That we want to do this. In the process of doing this, we need to gain this. We need to, energize this sector. We need to, do that. And then secondly, most of the money that's coming for the infrastructure project is actually borrowed. And when you borrow, whether from the Chinese,
they come with
or
conditions.
They come with the conditions, and then you have to give them to the Chinese companies or to the foreign companies from the parent countries that you are borrowing from. So at the end of the day, the money doesn't even actually say maybe enters into the government account, maybe nominally, because what you have is just money changing hands from, say, the foreign country A's bank accounts to foreign country A's contracting companies, and that's how the money goes around. And then maybe the country.
So what's the point of borrowing if you don't even have the independence to spend it in ways that it will benefit you? So you're borrowing because you also have to now pay back. It's like the whole thing, but the one that you have borrowed and the one that you paid, is just going to your creditor rather than to you.
Yeah, well, if you have the infrastructure in place, actually, infrastructure will translate into development, will open up opportunities for, if say, okay, you have the railway, it will open up a lot of opportunity, link up rural areas, open up, enhances the movement of people and goods and services for trade and all that. So there are actually benefits, if you are invested in infrastructure projects. But what we're saying is, how are you going to get the maximum benefit from this? So you are awarding a contract. Do you have, and then you also have to ask yourself, do you have, say, in terms of maybe rail construction, other, technology intensive projects, do we have the technical expertise to do that ourselves? That's also another question. So these are some of the issues that you have to look at. So if we don't have that, then obviously we have to, consider some countries doing it for us. But at the end of the day, if it's going to serve, the purpose of economic development, opening up communities, facilitating trade and other services, then that's actually fine, because at the end of the day, the net benefit is in favor of the country. So,
thank you. Okay.
Sorry, and to be just a little addition, that to be fair to the administration, they've made some moves to see that. Even while they borrow, they're trying to see how that can be of benefit, say, maybe to the local industry in terms of, say, maybe technology and skill transfer, and also local impact. You have the executive order number 4 and 5, which mandates some of those, companies, involving in engineering projects to actually commit 30% of, the value of that project, to local companies. So it's a kind of a way that the government is trying to do to see that maybe they minimize, some of those impacts of, say, capital flight, maybe due to the borrowing and, hiring big, foreign construction companies to execute projects.
Prof, food.
Yeah.
This is what everyone must, eat
survive.
every day to survive, And food has always been quite, the price of food in Nigeria has always been high relative to the incomes that most people receive. But under this administration, there's been criticism that the prices of food have skyrocketed. So isn't there something government could have done to help bring down the prices of food?
No, economic policy is just like a slow ball.
Okay.
The moment you kick the ball, it touches the other, then it triggers the other bad side of it. For instance, if you change, for instance, the price of fuel today, all these things will be transferred because there is no infrastructure in which it's cheaper to transport these goods and services. So they have to use those things. So the price will reflect that increase. So there are some disconnect in terms of policy to say it's okay. The policy, the inputs first in agriculture. The inputs, the prices are not coming down, they are going high because of the import components of the inputs. Secondly, the transport issues. Then the cost of labor has increased because the cost of living has risen, so therefore the price of labor also has to rise. It is only when regulated wages that cannot increase at a particular, but daily paid will say, no, if you are not paying this, I will not do it for you, and you can't do it without him. So therefore, that's are the things that makes the cost of food. Food inflation in the last 3 years has constantly rising.
Gone up, yes.
So you look at it, how then the government would now say, it's okay, we have this consistent inflation. Then the monetary policy would have to sit down and look at what are the indices that they will affect. But unfortunate, the monetary policy that's supposed to guide the monetary market and monetary issues, they all dabble in the fiscal side of government, giving out so many
So to the ordinary Nigerian, what do all these things mean? Because all the Nigerian, the ordinary person is concerned, is food on the table. And if that food is too high, the price of that food is too high, then he's probably unable to purchase it. So what could government have done beyond to reduce the situation, to make things better?
Yes, for now I see it's a global scenario.
Okay.
There is a global problem because of COVID-19. So there are scavenging for countries that cannot be food sufficient. So worldwide, the price of
food has
risen. But to some extent, you find that while some other countries, their situation is not as worse as ours because their income is commensurate to the level of standard of living. Because if you go to even just simple West African countries, simple West African countries, you find out that to afford a plate of rice and chicken is universal. Everybody can afford it.
Interesting.
But in Nigeria, even the lowest civil servant, it has to be hard because the income he earns could not afford those things as it were.
Thank you. So if you increase fuel price, as we're witnessing or expecting and anticipating, and for some people with trepidation, in the coming months, in April or in June, what's going to happen, particularly to the price of food, which we must all eat to survive?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a very negative ripple effect on the entire economy, not just on the price of food, because if you look at how our economy is dependent on petroleum prices, if you look at how farmers need to transport their goods from point of production to the markets, how manufacturers rely on diesel or on generators for electricity. So there's going to be a huge impact on on food prices and prices generally. And it's going to actually push a lot of people into poverty, deeper into poverty. And for me, food insecurity is the greatest form of insecurity. It is even far worse than the physical insecurity that people are suffering, because if people don't have the food to eat, then you can imagine the consequences. You can imagine the kind of things that they can actually commit, they can actually do to ensure that they actually get some food to eat. So, and that's why the government needs to elevate food security to a level of national security significance, to approach it with that significance that it approaches national security issues. That this is very fundamental to national stability.
So to import food like they import weapons, or what?
Well, it's not just about importing food, actually. As Prof said, actually, the food issue, the food inflation issue is, of course, global. Basically, it's global. But of course, it has been forecasted, right? Like 5 years back, we knew that it's going to happen, at some certain point in time. We knew how the increase was going on and, how the issue was becoming, even more serious. But if you look at in developed countries or in some, more organized countries, they look at that and they factor into that, and they keep on reviewing wages and other things to actually reflect inflation rates, so that people earnings and income are growing commensurate with the level of
Thank you. So if we're expecting food prices to rise as a result of this subsidy removal, exactly what can any government, not just this one, the future one, what can be done about this subsidy thing once and for all? Because you said earlier, like, you were questioning whether it exists at all.
Yeah, certainly. The problem we have with most of the people in government now, throughout their life, they were in business, private entities. In private entities, you employ somebody today, you fire him tomorrow. So your thinking is like you own him. So they found out that at the private sector side of it, there is no much to play with it. So they came into the government. It has been written, evidence from certain books that were written, that they didn't know that government is where they should be. And they come into the government. And that's why you see they treat civil servants with disdain. They just feel that they are just those entities. They don't, because most of the civil servants now, if you talk to them, they don't know how much they earn. They will just give you whatever they feel. That, look, we are in government, we are in the control, and that's the end of it. So unless there is that change of nomenclature in terms of who supposed to do what, because you remember the civil servants of Phillips, COD's time, and the rest. They tell the government, this is what you are supposed to do, and this is what you should do. And that time is even military, but not now. The civil servants are just there. They are disenchanted. You find them, they are not so until you build that institutions, you build that system, and unless you feed them well, then forget about fighting corruption, as it were.
So perhaps because we're just about the end of the program now. So if a president is appointing a substantive economic advisor when he has less than 18 months left to leave office, what does that say about that president and their economic priorities, or their priorities in the economy?
Well, for me, it's not just about having a substantive economic advisor or not. We've never lacked an economic advisory policy
Body.
or economic policy advisory tool in governance.
Okay.
Because we have the economic management team that was led by BP Osim Joe at the beginning.
Okay.
We had the National Economic Council, which was comprising the president, also the vice president, which was chaired by the vice president and other state governors. We also had, in January 2016, the president also had, Professor Dipolu, who was like a special advisor on economic matters, who was in the office of the vice president, who was like, in a way, de facto economic advisor before, Doyin Salami was appointed. And in 2019, 2 years ago, there was the Presidential Economic Advisory Committee that was chaired by Professor Dr. Doyin Salami. And then
so what
now,
does that mean? What?
Now that arrangement was also now abolished. Because initially you had the economic management team with the VP. In 2019, it was abolished. Then you had the Presidential.
So all of these things, what do they mean
committee
for the president's economic management?
It shows a level of inconsistency.
Okay.
Because we've been moving from one trial and error to another, from economic management team to Presidential Economic Advisory Committee to now Chief Economic Advisor to the President. But the thing is, as an advisor, your advisory role is as good as they are being implemented. No matter how good or how sound policies you have been able to advise your principal, if they are not properly implemented or you don't have a say in how they're implemented, then it's not going to achieve the desired result. And you also have to look at the relationship between the office of the advisor.
We'll have to go now. We will be leaving on that note that it is one thing to advise, but accepting and working with the advice and implementing the advice is even more important than the advice. Thank you very much, Professor Muhammad Muntaka Usman, for coming on the show today. Thank you very much, Ahmad Hussaini, also for coming on the show. We hope to receive you again some other time, hopefully very soon, as we go deeper into this political but also economically important year. Thank you also, Nigerians, for staying with us today as we discuss the issues around the Buhari economy. We hope that you will join us same time tomorrow for another episode of Daily Politics. I am Suleiman. Stay with us.